Welcome, everyone, to the Nerd Journey Podcast, episode number 34. We're joining you every week to talk IT career, news, and opinions based on our points of view. I'm your host, John White, at VDreamin on Twitter, joined by my co-host, Nick Cordy, at NetworkNerd_. Hey, Nick, how's it going?
Doing well, John. Just consumed my traditional coffee pre-podcast. I want to make sure our listeners know we are a couple of VMware solution engineers looking to bring the career advice we wish had been given to us earlier in our careers. We hope our career discussions will be relevant across disciplines and remain timeless. If you're enjoying our content, please drop us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you subscribe. And if you want to get in touch with us, tweet or DM at Nerd Journey. Ultimately, we're just two nerds on a journey.
A journey to virtual enlightenment.
So let's take a trip.
Hey, that was great, Nick. How was your week?
It was good. You know, I mentioned before that I had hurt my back and was kind of crooked, but the past 2 Saturdays is the second one. I've worked out, and so far I'm still not crooked. Everything's a little sore, but I'm stretching it out and feeling better.
Excellent. Very exciting. 2 weeks in a row. Nice job on the persistence there. I know that's the toughest part of that. Actually, that reminds me, this is the second time in a row that we're doing something too, right? A split episode.
Yes, sir. The last 2 episodes were with Tony Reeves. These 2 are going to be with a gentleman named Jimmy Tassin.
Excellent. I know you first came across him in Spiceworks, the IT community, but I think it was after I wasn't participating as much.
Yes, that's right. But you know what? Let's cover that in the episode. Here's our interview with Jimmy Tassin, part 1.
And we're joined by Jimmy Tassin. Jimmy, thanks a lot for taking the time to join us.
Thanks for having me here and let me talk to you guys for a little while.
We definitely appreciate Jimmy coming on. So we first met Jimmy through the Spiceworks community. He's written a number of articles in that community, been very active, a lot of posts, smart dude, posted in a lot of different forums. I actually met him at the Spice World conference that's each year in Austin, usually in the fall. He's done some sessions there as well and knows his way around a computer for sure. But if you don't mind, Jimmy, could you just share with the listeners a little bit about what you do today, and then we'll start in on how you got there?
Sure. So right now I am the IT director at Midwest Regional Bank, community bank around St. Louis. Been here for 5 years now. So as IT director, I oversee all IT operations in the bank. I'm an IT of one, but I do have an MSP that helps me with the help desk and a lot of the day-to-day simple tasks. So my focus is mostly on security, reporting, keeping executive management happy, that kind of thing.
Now, Can you tell us a little bit about how you first got into the technology space? You know, some people get there later in life, some people fall in love with it from a young age. So how about yourself?
It was definitely from a young age. I remember really getting into computers in middle school when the Macintoshes started showing up in the classrooms. Seeing them come in, it's like, ooh, something to play around with, something new that I don't know about. So I just kind of started tinkering with it. Then as I got further into middle school, I started spending more time in the library, reading books and that, playing with the computers. They had them there. And at the time, the librarian kind of noticed that I was pretty good with navigating around the computers as things popped up, figuring out how to fix them. So she had started mentioning to some of the teachers I was getting pretty savvy with them. So as the teachers started having issues crop up, they'd ask, "Hey, Jimmy, can you help me with this?" And I go, "Sure, let me fix that for you." So just kind of expanded from there, went into high school. There was a computer class in there, so I jumped into that, learning a little bit more on networking, a little bit more advanced computer techniques, that kind of thing. But then I took a break after high school, went to the Navy, and then after the Navy, kind of think about what I want to do. And I went to college for computer science and just kind of developed from there.
Interesting. It's funny to hear you get involved closing help desk tickets in middle school.
I'm curious as to how the documentation of the closure of those tickets went.
Well, considering they didn't have a help desk at that time, it was just telling the teacher, "Hey, it's fixed," and they go, "Okay, cool."
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So when you were in the Navy, no exposure to anything in the technology space, just just serving and then worrying about what you wanted to do later?
Well, not in the traditional IT sense. I was a cryptologic technician, so I did work with technology, um, and that just focused mostly on radar systems, working with combat control on the USS Carl Vinson, which is an aircraft carrier. So just keep an eye out for the area that's around the fleet, making sure that no one's trying to sneak up on us. So in that case, no traditional IT at that time. So there was a bit of a break for me, kind of thinking about what I wanted to do with my life at that point.
Excellent. Now, what was the next step after the Navy? Where'd you go and work?
So from there, I went to Webster in Missouri, just going into computer science because thinking back from middle and high school, I was really fond of computers. Oh, I did forget to mention too that in high school, I wanted to be a game developer. I think like at most people at that age wanted to do. So I actually got into the Nintendo Academy, DigiPen Institute. So I learned some basic programming with that. Developed a few basic games like Pong and Worm and Space Invaders. So I was thinking about, like, yeah, I really enjoyed that. So I want to get into programming. So that's what I went into computer science for. Um, Having to slog through math like calculus and physics, which I initially thought would be fun, and then it's really math heavy, so that was a struggle. Then once it really started focusing on programming, and that was when I really enjoyed it. So I got both my bachelor's and master's within 4 years. So some of my credits from the Navy carried over, so that helped. And then Webster had a combined degree program, so I was able to transfer some of my bachelor degree classes into my master's, so I was able to accelerate it more. But as I was halfway through my master's, I realized programming's not for me. Um, I finished my master's, but it's like, yeah, I don't want to be a programmer. But at that point, that's when I started my first IT job during my bachelor's degree period with Bethesda Health Group. So started there as regular help desk tech, doing tier one, and then after a while, doing a little bit of tier two. Got pushed into audio with phones, handling the phone system, which at that time was Mitel, and dealing with all the analog goodness that it came with.
Well, I don't want to let you just blow past that because you've touched on something which is,
Mm-hmm.
kind of my pet peeve. There's no real strict career
Right.
path into IT, right? It almost seems like everybody who's in IT kind of accidentally got there because a computer science
Mm-hmm.
program is all about programming, and a lot of times it's about compiler programming or really low level stuff, and there's not even really, there's programming boot camps, but there's no real IT boot camp. Maybe like some professional colleges or something like that.
Yeah, the
Your
for-profit.
ITT techs or something like that. I don't even know if that's the for profit. That's it. And I don't even know if those are going concerns. They seem to have,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of them seem to have gone under. But there is this inflection point for you where you said,
Mm-hmm.
it's not for me. And I'm just interested in finding out what about it
Pretty
wasn't for
much
you.
kind of as I was going through the bachelor's, learning the programming, because I was doing a lot of studying in actual game development, what's involved, and reading a lot of stories about programmers and developers, and kind of getting more of a better picture of what I guess life is as a developer and programmer. Definitely wasn't kind of what I was expecting. I think, especially at at the high school, middle school age, we got the starry eyed look of what a programmer, a game developer is and does, and then seeing what real stories from people that are going through it, and like some companies shutting down, and you get, especially when you get the crunches before launch, and it's like, I just don't think like I said, through the masters, I realized it's like, I don't think I can do this like 8 to 10 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week. It's like, yeah, I just get so burnt because I enjoyed programming, because that's why I got into it and stayed with it through my masters, is I really enjoyed it, because for me, programming was solving a puzzle. You get, hey, you need a program that does this task, and it's like, so how can I break that down as much as I can with code to solve it? So for me, it was like a puzzle, and I enjoyed it. But then it's like when I realized, it's like, do I want to do this 8 to 10 hour days? And like, I really don't want to. I can't. I get burned out so quickly.
Yeah. That sounds so familiar. It's a story we hear a lot. Um, like you enjoying the structured thinking, but not necessarily liking the tools
Hmm.
enough to do that all the time, right? Wanting to be a little bit more knowing what happens before the problem gets turned into a coding problem and what happens
Hmm.
after the coding problem is
Yep.
solved, right? So, yeah, very, very familiar. Interesting. So I'm sorry I interrupted you. You were talking about getting involved in kind of climbing the ranks at your first job and having to deal with
Yep. Yep.
physical PBXs, phone switches. Yeah, the very also very familiar. So
You're fine.
uh, sorry, I interrupted you
So my
as you were
first
talking
job
about
actually
that.
started as an internship. I was working at the business office at the college, and I was just bored. I was screwing around a lot and just not really doing my job like I should have. So got fired from that. And so I was at that point, it's like, what, I need to obviously find a job to support me and my wife. And I just happened to stumble upon a pamphlet in the hall while I was walking around between classes for a local healthcare company looking for, someone to jump in. I was like, well, I know how to work with computers to a decent degree, so let me check it out. So got an interview. Fortunately, my boss at the time was really cool because, even though I was, I think, 22, 23, a bit of an adult, I'm still a kid enough to where I didn't really get a proper suit for my interview. So I had a jacket, but I wore jeans. I thought, hey, I'm dressed up. So he told me, nope, you're not, you need to do better than that. Um, so had my interview, got started as a intern for I think about a year, where I proved that I knew enough, so they hired me on full time.
So I've heard people
Mm-hmm.
call the jeans and
Got it.
jacket the Texas tuxedo, but maybe that's a Texas thing since I'm in Dallas Fort Worth.
Well, who knows? Like I said, at that time, I thought I was dressed up.
It depends on a lot on the industry, right? And that's one of those things that we talk about when we're giving interview guidance is that it's always a little bit easier to back off. Like you're wearing a suit, but you look around and nobody
Mm-hmm.
else is, so you just take the jacket off. That type of thing. It's easy to take a tie off. It's easy to take a jacket off. And if you have any kind of insight what the culture of the organization is going in, even just walking in the front door or doing a drive by, a couple of days earlier and seeing how the people at the front desk are dressed and that kind of thing. It's always easier to calibrate. But I mean, I'm with Nick. I wear
Well,
jeans and a
plus, I don't
jacket
think
every
any
day.
manager is
So
going to complain if you dress up more than expected. There's that saying, dress for the job you want.
it yeah, it's really strange. I've seen some guidance, and we've talked about some articles in the past where people are like, "Hey, you dressed in a suit, and this isn't a suit company, so you don't fit our culture." And I'm like, okay, so how are the people supposed to know that ahead of time? And it's always something along the lines of, well, use your contacts within the industry to figure out, um, you know, what the culture at that company is like. And I was like, okay, so that feels a little bit like a
Mm-hmm.
like a social filter. Really, is like you have to know somebody who knows somebody, and if you don't, then you can't get hired because you're going to dress the wrong way, which doesn't feel fair.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like just tell me
I
how to
just
dress,
ask.
and
Like
I'll dress that way.
last couple
You know,
job interviews I did,
yeah.
right before when we were talking about scheduling the first in person one, I just asked the person I was on the phone. So what's the expected dress code? Yeah, so I just ask them.
That is great advice. At least you didn't
That's
get up
great
on the
advice.
soapbox like John did. I mean, I knew that was coming.
Yeah, I walk in for your first interview. It's like I'm dressed the way I want to, and you're gonna deal with it.
At least they didn't do to you what I did to some guys that came to interview for me, and I made them go out in the machine shop and do some stuff, and they were dressed nice. So shame on me. I should have told them to dress down. But
There you go.
we interrupted you. You were talking about
You're
your
fine.
internship at the healthcare place. Now, did that turn into a full-time gig there, or did you end up moving on somewhere else?
Nope, that turned into a full-time gig after a year. And I was at that point where I could finally kind of cut down a little bit on my classes, and I switched to night classes to kind of finish up my bachelor's. So it really wasn't a problem to go full time. Also, at that point, I was feeling more confident in my skills because I went in and again I had some experience working with computers, but going in to an enterprise sized company, I think at that time there were around 2,500 employees. Um, I don't remember how many computer systems. So, I kind of had put myself in the expectation that there's going to be a lot of learning for me to do because it's going to be such a big shift of what I know. And so that's just kind of where I started my first job, is just have my eyes open and my mind open and just absorb as much as I can from the team I was working with.
Yeah, that's actually really cool that you started at such a large environment, because we just talked about on a previous episode how to scale for your next endeavor, and the folks moving from the small shop to the big shop might have that big fish small pond syndrome. But
Mhm.
it sounds like you were just trying to learn everything you could, and you didn't know any different to be scared of such a large environment.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing for anybody, no matter what, if you're going up or down, for the next job is, just go in there with expectation, what you know, but things are going to be different between each company no matter what. So just be prepared to not jump in and start making changes right off the bat, but give it a couple months and actually learn their infrastructure, how their procedures work before you start making changes.
Yeah, joining an enterprise from kind of being, I don't know, I'll say hobbyist
Mm-hmm.
level, it's very very different, right? You have to, it's like the difference between like, well, I cook for all my friends and family at the cookouts, and now I
Mm-hmm.
have to be a prep cook at a restaurant, right? It's a whole, like, you might use the same tools and it might look the same, but it's much more structured, much more like it needs to be an exact way, and everybody has to have like expectations up and down the
Mm-hmm.
path of what everything's going to look like. So, you know, it's very interesting to hear you make that jump. I really like to hear about
Sure.
what that learning curve was like.
Yeah.
Was it?
So, hobbyist to professional pretty quickly. That is like, before then, I'm thinking of computer issues like, okay, the software is not working right, or maybe the internet's kind of weird on this one computer, and then going in, and it's like, now I have a whole network of computers that are talking to each other. It's like, now I got to learn how the networking side works. That if the software's not working, it may not just be that computer; it could be the network that it's connecting to. Um, so everybody that I worked with on the team, I mean, they're all veterans at that point. They're all working, I think, between 5 to 10 years of professional experience already. So, I'm just a kid. So, there's all this experience that I can talk to, um, and learn from. And, especially with my attitude at that time of, I want to learn, I want to help. So, I mean, I think that's what all of us in IT professionals start the job with, is we just want to help people. This is a skill that we know we're familiar with. So we just want to solve problems. And that was another thing that helped me with the degrees I had going through those programming classes, because it really put me in the mindset of critical thinking a lot more, of here's a problem and start breaking it down right off the bat, of start figuring out what the problem or what solutions won't fix it. Basically, trying to narrow down where the problem actually is by figuring out what it isn't. And that's pretty much a lot of my learning curve right off the bat, is besides talking to the others on my team about what the things that they're seeing is, of looking at a problem and figuring out what isn't the problem and narrowing it down as much as I can to get that problem solved.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. I'm wondering whether the organization had like a strict criteria or training process to get from like a level one help desk to level two to and so on
No,
to climb the ladder of
it was unstructured.
technologies.
So I had to jump in with both feet and be ready. Um, Yep. So that, obviously I learned pretty quickly
funny.
that Google's my friend. So searching everything I can as I came up. If I hit a brick wall of, I can't think of any other things it could be, then I'd talk to my team and brainstorm with them, figure out what it is. Learning how Active Directory works. Like we went through a refresh there with our phones. So that was an interesting time because I think that was maybe about 3 or 4 years in at that point. Because when I started, we had a big team. I think if I remember right, like 8 personnel in the IT team, and a lot of those guys were contractors. And so after like a year and a half, most of the contractors were kicked out. So then we had a team of 3 to 4. So fortunately, at that point, I learned enough to where I could get by without too many problems. But then the phone guy who did a lot of the maintenance of the Mitel system was fired. And my boss, IT manager at that point, said, "All right, you're doing all the Mitel stuff because you know it." Because was kind of under training or shadowing him for a few months, kind of learning the system. And again, I was at that point where it's like, I just want to learn. I don't care what it is, just teach it to me. So I was learning the Mitel system, actually going to the punch downs in the server room and learning how to use the butt phone to do troubleshooting. Yeah, so that was a lot of fun. And then we finally decided to switch to Cisco. So I think it took about a year to switch from Mitel to Cisco. At that point, it's like, hey, I don't have to deal with phones anymore.
Like
Yep.
a voice over IP system,
yep, voice over IP,
or something else. Got it. Yeah. So then maybe outsourcing.
Yeah, around that time we had a service provider because it's still like a 4-person team, and the service provider did most of the networking stuff at that point. So the rest of us did some of the network. We had one guy that did focus solely on the Cisco. And so I didn't have to deal with the phones anymore. I did want to learn it, but my boss said, no, you don't have any experience with it, so we're not going to teach you. The other guy knows it more. And it was at that point that I was looking to develop my career more, get into networking, because obviously I'm doing help desk. Networking's the next big step. But my boss didn't see any need to let me learn networking because we had an MSP. So I was like, all right, I think it's time for me to go. So about 5 years, that's when I moved on to Electro Savings Credit Union, where I became the system administrator.
Interesting. So was it an easy decision to make? Was it a very short period of time for you to come to that decision, or?
No, it was pretty quick. Because I talked to my manager like after one of my reviews, and I said, here, this is my interest. My goal is I want to learn networking, get into the networking side of IT. And that's when he told me that there was no interest to train me in that or let me start tinkering with it because we had an MSP that was handling in that. So they wanted to keep me pretty much at tier 1, somewhat tier 2. And that's pretty much where they wanted me. And I always have like an ambitious drive to me. I just want to keep learning, developing. So when he told me that, it's like, yep, that's the sign for me to move on.
Is an interesting lesson for employers and managers too. Like when you have good people, you need to have like a technical career path for good technical people.
Or even if as a manager, if you can't do it, like if your executive management doesn't want that, maybe even just have a plan of, and letting your staff know it's like, hey, you have a limited track here, but we'll give you what we can. And if you decide to move on, go for it. I'll support you personally as much as I can, kind of thing. Just be cognizant of it.
Absolutely. I love the attitude of wanting to learn everything you can. And I kind of wonder if maybe, and again, this may sound harsh, but I kind of wonder if maybe the manager shouldn't have pointed you toward, hey, you can work with this MSP, shadow them while they do the networking, and at least learn from that component. Because a lot of times when you're working with an MSP or someone in support for a vendor, just asking questions when you open a ticket or raise an issue, you can learn a ton of stuff. Just in
Oh yeah.
sitting with someone for 30 minutes to an hour who does this all the time, you can learn all kinds of things.
Yeah, I agree. It was just kind of the environment at that time, and there just wasn't the interest.
Yeah, it is what it is sometimes, and recognizing that the employer doesn't have an interest in moving you up or getting you trained up, and their main interest is to keep you exactly where you are, doing exactly what you're doing. For people who are ambitious, that's like one of the signals that you're in the wrong position
Hmm.
or working for the wrong company or the wrong manager, right? I mean, so then it's just figuring out what it is that you
Yeah, and
need
I
to
mean, I was
do,
showing them
taking that
like
next
my
step.
manager, even his boss, which is the CIO. It's like I'm willing to learn anything because I was not only was I help desk and Mitel support for a while, I also did all the AV audio video that the company did, and that would end up being quite a bit of a job because that was working, making sure our training classrooms were set up because we had training classrooms at the main location for new nurse staff, for the introduction, when they first start. Uh, all the different locations would have regular events for the residents because it wasn't just healthcare like a hospital kind of thing, but it was also long-term living and hospice and a bunch of other services like that. So there's a lot of different training sessions they did for the residents or different events, and I was always there setting up all the projectors and the computers, the screens, and the audio, the speakers. Even presented a few sessions for some of the senior residents. I think one of the sessions I did was, an introduction to social media for them. Because, that's when social media is kicking off, like Facebook and that. So showing them like, hey, with like Facebook, you can kind of it's a good way to get in touch with your family. And even if they're not here all the time, you can still talk to them. So I was getting involved in just about everything I could at that time.
Now, when you did the training, was that something that you volunteered to do or something that you were asked to do?
It was brought up by one of the event managers. I can't remember the exact title within the company. That they're wanting to do something to introduce some of the residents to technology. I said, yeah, I'll just jump right in. I mean, the other guys' mentalities really, they had no interest in something like that. And I was just always, the one that was ready to jump in. So they brought it up and I said, yep, I'll do it without any hesitation. Everyone's like, okay, go ahead. I don't have to do it.
I think I just realized that you're
Hmm.
talking about long-term care residents as opposed to like
Hmm. Right.
doctors, like resident doctors. Um,
Yep.
so that makes a lot more sense to me now, like needing to get in touch with people
Right.
over social media and
Yep.
Facebook. Okay,
So that was
got it.
pretty much everything at my first job. And then,
And you made that transition. You made the decision to look for a new position. What was that search process like? How did you define what it is that you wanted to look for, and how
well, I
did you
pretty
go
much
about
knew the
doing that?
title I was looking for, which was a system/network administrator, because that was, at that point I had enough experience talking with the other guys in the team that was pretty much the next step up from help desk. So that's exactly what I was looking for. And it actually, for that one, that didn't take too long to find. If I remember, I think I found it on Dice when Dice was pretty good early on. So I found that, applied for it, and while I didn't have any banking at the time because this job was at a credit union, they saw that I was in healthcare, so still dealing with regulation. That it wasn't too much of a transition, so they're interested and hired me on the spot at that time.
And that goes back to Nick's
Hmm.
phrase of relatable experience, right? Um, when you had experience with a regulated industry that had
Right.
customer privacy laws, so it might not have been the exact same regulations, but you were at
Yeah,
least
and for those
familiar with that
that don't know, it
process,
would be HIPAA.
and maybe right, and maybe having to do audits or be accountable to an audit office or something along those lines, audit
Right.
controls,
Yep. Making sure
governance,
that data is
that kind of
secure.
thing.
And were you specifically targeting the industry you went into, which I believe you said was banking, or were you just looking for general systems administration and the industry didn't matter?
At that time, I didn't care about the industry. I was just looking for, the next move up. So again, looking at system network administrator, and it just happened to be banking, and interviews went well. They liked my experience and hired me on.
Was the environment around the same size, bigger, smaller, bigger team, smaller team?
Much smaller environment, going from 2,500 to 3,000 employees to 110. And I think three locations, I think it was. So yeah, big change in the environment and how procedures and policies worked. But the team of the didn't really change much. It went from, like I said, I think I left there at Bethesda around 4, and then I went into Electro with a 3-person team, including me.
So was that like a corporate office with a branch
Uh,
downstairs and then two satellite branches,
no, we were
or
at
some
the
other
IT
physical
was at the main
location?
branch, which was across the street from the corporate office, because corporate wanted their own fancy area, and the main branch didn't have space for them. Yep,
They
and it
want
was
that
right
Class A
across the
office
street, so it
space,
wasn't
right?
that big of a deal. But yeah, even if the actual exec, management team want to be in the branch, there wasn't any space for them anyway. It was just one floor in a basement. Bet you can guess which part of that building we were in.
I'm blanking out.
Yep. Yep, basement. I think many can relate to that.
That transition was smooth. How did that go? Because you had, just
Mhm.
recently or within the past 5 years, gone through an adjustment and a learning experience,
hmm
and
Yeah,
here you
so the
are going
first
through
day of
another
the
one.
job, I think, was pretty much the indicator of how that would go. Is I walked in, the manager wasn't there. Um, the help desk tech, the guy that was below me, was there, and we talked for a little bit. Show me where my computer was, which was right across from him. So I go to the computer, turn it on. It's like, oh wait, I don't have a network connection. So I'm looking around, and my first thought is, all right, they're pulling some kind of prank on me to see exactly what I know. Right? It's like they're going to leave me some kind of problem to figure out right off the bat. So I look around. It's like, oh, all right, it's plugged in on here, but still no network. All right. So I ask him to get in the server room. So I look in the server room, and then I start tracing cables out. And we didn't have a toner, so I had to do it manually, trying to figure out where it is. And eventually found it and found it was unplugged. So plugged it in. He goes, I swear it's not. We're not trying to test you. It's like it was just unplugged.
Now, did you already have the
Too
domain
funny.
admin at that point while you couldn't get your computer connected, or was that not yet?
Uh, no, I think I had to wait a little bit for the manager to get in and get full access. But yeah, they pretty much gave me full access right off the bat. Um, and just so you know, and I'm pretty sure I told him too. It's like, I was really wanting to get into networking at this point, and so I didn't really have a lot of experience networking. So here I am as the guy that's responsible for all the networking in the bank and the credit union. I gotta say credit union, because credit union people get very sensitive when those get interchanged. But yeah, so just having to jump in and start learning how to work with the servers with Active Directory, and that's where a lot of my experience with Active Directory and group policy came in, is because nothing against my manager there, but group policy was a huge mess. I think more than half of them didn't even work.
Yeah, unless you're a specialist, right, or you want to specialize in something like that,
hmm
it's really easy to mess that up.
So so we kind of worked through a few different things for a while, and then we started having issues with the servers. Like I remember one of the first big incidents I walked into in the morning was it was our exchange server was down because we had it in house. And my manager, he always get in a little bit later. So it's like I walk in, first thing I hear everybody screaming is like, I can't get to my email. I'm like, oh my God, I don't know how to work with Exchange. So I start, so first thing I did, basics, look at the server itself. Is it turned on? Is everything connected? And then jumping in and making sure all the services are running. I got to a brick wall and it's like, called my manager. It's like, all right, I'll be there in a few minutes. And then, started going. Once he actually arrived, then we started going through it and figuring things out. It was pretty quick at that point. But we were starting having issues like that with servers failing because Exchange Server went down a couple times, and the CEO is extremely sensitive about his email. So we were at the point where we're getting calls like at 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning because he wants to check his email, and nobody's in the office, so having to scramble to get that done. So finally convinced them to let us get some new servers, and my boss is like, all right, you're going to be responsible for ordering the servers, specing them out, and setting them up. I'm like, this is the first time I'm actually setting up a server. And I don't know if, I know you guys mentioned that you're looking through some of my older posts, but you probably might have seen this one, my Mount Everest post that I made. I think that was one of my first big articles on Spiceworks. Because that project was, right at the beginning, it was extremely daunting. Again, it's my first time setting up an enterprise server. I've set up computers, that's no big deal. So that was kind of how I started. It's like, all right, I need to take it one step at a time. So just trying to spec it out as best as I can for the budget they gave me, and then going through it and setting up the server. And I will be honest, I think I had to reformat that server 5 different times, installing OS till I got it just right. It took me a little while.
Yeah, that sounds right. That sounds completely normal to me. The first time you're setting up a Windows server.
You mentioned that was your first post or first big post in the community in Spiceworks, right? So
Yes.
What drew you there? How'd you end up finding that? And what is the Spiceworks community for people that are listening?
Sure. So Spiceworks is it's a couple different things actually. So first is there's a community aspect, which I'm quite active in. I'm a mace at that right now, getting close to PC, but it's still going to be a while. But the community part is just basically a forum of IT professionals of different backgrounds and experiences where, we chat, talk in the water cooler, ask questions of issues we're trying to figure out that, we're just stumped on, or sharing different ideas, a bunch of different things. And there's also the tools that they have, like the help desk, the inventory, a bunch of different things. So yeah, I got introduced to Spiceworks at the credit union because they were using that for their help desk and inventory. So it's like, oh, this is pretty interesting. So I got in. The software was pretty good. I think we were using the software probably a couple months before I realized there was a community part of it. So I jumped in and just kind of browsing, lurking at first for probably a couple months. And then I think my very first post, I don't even remember what it is now, but it was definitely one of those, the first post is always a question to something I'm trying to figure out. So going through that a few times, trying to get a few different things I didn't know answered, and then kind of looking around a little bit more. I was like, oh, maybe I can share some of the things I know. And at that point, it was mostly Active Directory and group policy. So with this server project, that was one of the things I did is set up a brand new domain, because I wanted to start fresh. Because again, the big thing that was giving me frustrations, the group policies that my manager had set up were not working. So I wanted to start fresh and set it all up from scratch. And that really just involved me reading through every single policy that was there and learning what each one did and how they behaved. And that's pretty much where a lot of my experience have came in, is just reading those one item at a time and figuring out what settings I could automate that way.
Did you ever have a decision point where you thought, hey, maybe
I've
I should
thought
get
about it a few
certified?
times, and it's definitely one of those topics I see from time to time in Spiceworks. But at least so far in my career now, I've thought about it a few times, but I've just never really gone for certifications, just because there hasn't been a big need for it professionally for me. Mm-hmm.
Right. It serves as a validation, right, for a lot of people. But if you have a reputation for it, if you've written articles about it, then maybe that is better
Yeah, I think
than a
it just depends.
certification
I think
for.
for at least my perspective is certifications matter more when you're going into the service side of IT, like MSPs, managed service providers. Because at least all the ones I always talk to, they always vouch or go on about how we have so many ex-Cisco engineers that are certified. We have so many Microsoft engineers that are certified. So I think that's where a lot of the value is with the service side of IT. But like working within companies, like I've yet to have a single boss that's ever asked me, "Hey, have you ever thought about getting this certification?" It's like no one, even the managers that are IT professionals, they've never asked, they never brought it up. So I've never really pursued it.
Now, did your coworkers participate in the Spiceworks community as well, or were you the only one that did, in addition to using the software day to day?
No, it was only me. I tried to get them, like the help desk tech there, because at that time I started going to the Spice Corps because I was really wanting to expand my network was the big thing at that time. I just wanted to talk to other people, network a little bit. So I started going to the Spice Corps, trying to get them active in it. But my boss, he was always busy with management because management's management. So they kept him busy with that, and also working with the banking software, the core software. So he didn't have a lot of time for that, and the help desk tech just really didn't have much of an interest. So it was just me that was in the community.
How did your involvement kind of ramp up? I mean, at least in my experience, once I found out about the point system and leveling up and asking questions and answering questions, it almost
Hmm.
became addictive, right? Um,
Yeah,
was
at
that your
first it
experience
definitely
or was it
was,
something
getting
else?
into it. I was like, oh, hey, here's these points, and the gamification really interested me of improving myself. So going in there and like at this time, I did have a decent amount of time to kind of to spend in Spiceworks. So I did spend a lot of time answering questions, especially with active directory and group policy. Um, I didn't at this point. I was really transitioning way a lot more from asking questions to answering them. And then as I finished the big server project, getting everything set up in there, switching us over to new domain, which was fun. And I forgot to mention this with Bethesda, but I actually had experience transitioning domains because we did that at Bethesda. We went from one big domain and to
Hmm.
splitting them out for each location. So each location had a domain. So I went through that process already. So I was pretty comfortable doing that at the credit union. And as we finished, I'm like, I realized how much of a learning experience that was for me. So that's when I had the interest of writing that post about my Mount Everest moment was, if this was such a big thing for me and I got a lot of it and how I felt before it even started, I'm sure there's plenty of other professionals that have. So that's when I decided I reached out to Spiceworks because for those articles at that time, it was actually run by somebody at Spiceworks. So I reached out to him and said, hey, I've got this story and I want to actually write it up. And he goes, sure, go ahead. So that's when I wrote my first big article, just kind of relaying my experiences of growing from that project.
And it's what is called a spotlight on IT article. There are hundreds of
Hmm.
those in the Spiceworks community. We'll make sure and put the link to this one and a couple others that you wrote in the community.
Oh man, I have got to find a different record scratch effect. That one's really rough. Sorry, folks. We need to split this episode right as Jimmy gets into his experience with Minecraft.
Yeah, and speaking of splitting, sometimes you have to split your time between getting to that next level and doing your day job well. And if you need to get to that next level, there's no reason you can't send that tweet out to @NerdJourney and join the John White School of Mentoring today. Pricing and packaging to come. Now, hopefully everybody heard about the homework assignment to read those 2 spotlight articles. That'll give you some insight on what's coming next week as we continue our conversation with Jimmy. Just a reminder, we want people to subscribe and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. We want to know if we're being helpful and are always looking for interesting questions to ponder. We're collectively on Twitter @NerdJourney.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, those links to those articles, spotlight articles, are in the show notes. Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White @VJourneyman, for Nick Cordy @NetworkNerd_, signing off.
Adios.